Okay, we're learning about the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle preps the body for pregnancy. That's pretty much its entire point, right? It is preparing to house a baby, to grow a new human life. It begins at puberty. And obviously puberty is pretty variable for everybody, so different ages. Puberty is actually starting to get earlier, but that's another story for another day. And it ends at menopause. And each cycle is approximately 28 days. Now I say approximately because the range of normal is from about 19 days to 37 days. So it's incredibly huge range what is considered normal. Now the menstrual cycle isn't just the menstruation part, which so many people associate it with. There's actually two parts here. There's the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. In the ovary, there's a whole system of maturation happening. In the follicles, which are the kinds of cells that are housing these ovum, so the individual eggs, the follicles will mature each egg. So as this stage happens, it's kind of going this way. It will mature to the point where it's so big that eventually the egg will burst out and it will travel down the fallopian tubes to get to the uterus. After that's happened, the follicle that matured the egg becomes what's called what's known as the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is kind of a temporary endocrine organ. It starts to produce hormones, and we'll get to what they are in a minute. But after that, it starts to produce so many hormones, it kind of peters out, and then it dies off. And then the whole cycle starts again with a different follicle. So that is the ovarian cycle. It's all about maturing the eggs. On the flip side, there's the uterine cycle. So within the uterus, what's happening is the cell lining is building up and up and up and up, and then by the time that egg is released, if sperm fertilizes that egg, then it's good to house that baby. It's got a nice thick nutrient layer of cells, and then it can stay and house the baby. However, majority of those cycles, there is going to be no fertilization of that egg. So the uterine lining goes, we don't need it this month. It's going to come apart, it's going to shed, and then the start of the cycle begins at menstruation. And the menstruation part is where the uterine lining sloughs off and it comes out the vagina, and therefore we see that bleeding. Now it's not technically bleeding, but we are losing vascular tissue, right? So that is the menstrual cycle there. The ovarian cycle with the egg maturation and sort of the maturation and degradation of the uterus. Here's a uterus. Here's one I prepared earlier. Now this is exactly what the ovaries, fallopian tubes and uterus look like, and there's four main hormones that we need to learn about: FSH, LH, estrogen, and I've written OE because you're going to see it written in different ways, preferably with the O at the front, and progesterone. There's a whole lot going on, and it is a cycle. So let's have a quick chat about what's going on. Firstly, the hypothalamus is always in charge. It is in charge because it is that brain section that is part of the endocrine system. And what happens is it's going to send the message to the pituitary immediately to start producing FSH. Now, FSH is actually called follicle stimulating hormone. I'm not going to write down everything, so you might need to listen to my voice for this and write down some of the things that I say. So there's going to be an increase in FSH that is made directly by the pituitary. And FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, does exactly that, okay? It stimulates follicles. Now, if a follicle is stimulated, it means that the egg is going to mature. And this is all happening, remember, back in that ovarian cycle. If the egg starts to mature, what happens is that estrogen is produced. In that follicle, okay? So increase of estrogen all of a sudden. Now estrogen contributes to a couple of different things. Number one, it contributes to maintaining the lining of this uterus here. Maintaining uterine lining, right? That's its number one goal. Its other goal is, as the increase of estrogen occurs, it starts to signal to the pituitary one more time to produce something else, and it starts to produce LH, which is called luteinizing hormone, right? Luteinizing hormone. You'll probably see with a Z as well. And I've probably spelt it wrong. All right, luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is in charge of kicking that egg out, right? It is in charge of egg release. If the egg starts to be released, what happens is the follicle turns into the corpus luteum, and that is what we talked about before, is that temporary endocrine organ. Now, the corpus luteum is in charge of producing progesterone. And once again, progesterone is helping to maintain uterine lining. So the uterine lining there is being maintained by all the progesterone that's being produced, as well as any estrogen that is still left over from what's been happening with the egg production. So once the egg's spat out, because the luteinizing hormone's in charge of it, then the corpus luteum starts to produce that progesterone. Because there is progesterone in the mix, what happens is it decreases the amount of luteinizing hormone and the amount of follicle stimulating hormone that the pituitary is spitting out. Right? That's kind of the stimulus response. If progesterone's around, then there is no FSH happening and there's no luteinizing hormone. Eventually, however, the corpus luteum, I'm going to say peters out, kind of runs out of steam. And what happens is there's a big drop in progesterone. When that big drop happens, that's when menstruation occurs. All right, that is when, and I'm going to write it in red, menstruation occurs. That's when the bleeding that we associate with the menstrual cycle happens. Now, because there's a huge drop in progesterone and the menstruation is getting rid of this lining here, it signals to the body that, hey, we have to start this thing again. And that's why it's called a cycle. The hypothalamus notices, the pituitary says, oh, okay, we're ready for this again. And then we can increase the FSH. Sorry guys, lots of disruptions. I've even moved location. Okay, so we've got the hypothalamus noticing the pituitary is going to spit out some FSH, which stimulates some follicles. The egg's going to mature, and because the egg is starting to grow, the estrogen is produced. The estrogen starts to trigger the maintaining of the uterine lining. It starts to build up, starts to thicken. Because of the increased estrogen, the pituitary does notice that as well, and it says, okay, time to get some luteinizing hormone to release that egg. It's completely matured, now let's get it out into the fallopian tubes. Once that follicle is done doing its thing, starts to turn into the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone. That progesterone once again goes to maintaining that uterine lining. Now, the increased progesterone leads to a decrease in the FSH and the luteinizing hormone because we don't need them anymore. If there's increased progesterone, which means we have a very thick uterine lining, it's preparing for the baby, so there's no need for them to be spitting out other eggs. However, eventually the corpus luteum kind of dies out, right? It starts to disappear and stops producing progesterone, and that huge drop in progesterone will lead to the uterine lining shedding. Once that uterine lining is shed, the whole cycle starts again. Day one on the cycle is considered the very first day of menstruation. So if we have a look at this diagram, quite complex, but it actually covers everything really nicely. We've got the maturation of the egg, and at this point here, you can see there's a huge spike in the luteinizing hormone, which means the egg is going to be released, right? We can see that egg happening. After that, the corpus luteum puts out progesterone, and we can see that the progesterone here on this graph is starting to spike, and then, so many interruptions today. Okay, the progesterone has spiked, the corpus luteum starts to disappear, and the whole thing starts again. We can see here in the uterine cycle, all of that cell lining is increasing, and eventually it will shed, right, during that menstruation section, after that progesterone level has dropped. So there's a lot going on here. There's huge amounts of things happening, and if if a pregnancy actually occurs and something fertilizes this egg, then the progesterone actually keeps being pumped out, and that's going to keep maintaining the lining of the uterus.